Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I wanted to talk about this issue of sending nudes to someone that you may be in a relationship with. I mean, I'm thinking to myself in the head, let's leave aside the issue of whether Islamically it's allowable or not allowable to take nude pictures. Let's move beyond that point. Let's get into the issue of what it means for you as a series of possibilities. Firstly, when you open yourself up in that way, there's this assumption that you can trust the person that you're dealing with. And say, for instance, you can trust a person. Say, for instance, you're in a relationship and it's moving every way you want. But then a few years later, I have to move because there's kids here. If you say a few years later, you're in a situation where the relationship crashes. Now that relationship crashes, that person has those pictures. And that's why I said I don't want to get into the issue of talking about whether it's permissible or not permissible to take nude pictures. But I wanted to look more at what we call the malat, the outcomes. The ma'alat is a concept or principle in the Sharia. Because say, for instance, within the confines of husband and wife, that becomes a dimension in and of itself. You know what I'm saying? Between husband and wife and what goes on behind closed doors and all of that. That's why I don't want to get into that. But I do want to say, or even I have to say relationships, because everybody's not dealing within the context of marriage. And so I would say that, sisters, I don't think a guy or a man deserves that type of weight to hold over your neck. Because when you open up to that, you cross a boundary of vulnerability. You make yourself vulnerable to that person on the long term. And human beings, as the Quran teaches us, they have dimensions. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala in the Quran talked about Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, that he's going to establish a vicegerent on the earth, one who will uphold the values of the deen and will be a guardian of the creation and upright. And the angels responded back, أَتَجْعَلُوا فِيهَا مَن يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. And so from here, the angels respond, well, you create on the earth a being, that will create corruption and bloodshed. So we have both of those realities within us, to be upright and to just be devils on the face of the earth. So I think that, as women, and I know there's sensitivity over this type of issue, men telling women and all this, but I'm not even speaking from that angle. It's just a brother to sister interaction, communication. I think that with the way things are in today's time, I think women have to be careful how they navigate when they become vulnerable. And that's a level of vulnerability that there's no necessity to. You know what I'm saying? Love in a relationship doesn't depend upon that. So, like I said, even you got to think about the long-term consequences, even within the context of a relationship that's moving in the right direction, or that would be, for Muslims, they would be considered legit. You're putting yourself in a vulnerability situation. And okay, if it happened, should you hold yourself a slave to that reality? If it happened and now you're being blackmailed, you have no other choice but to handle that by going to the authorities. Because if you're being blackmailed, and this varies from community to community. In some communities, I'm not encouraging it, but in some communities, there's going to be a fight. Somebody's going to be part of a fight. And in other communities, it's just going to come right back to the woman. In some communities, the woman will still be. In some communities, the woman will be blamed. In some communities, that can lead to her violence against her. It can lead to a lot of things. In some communities, it's just going to be a fight with the brother who's holding the pics. And that's how it's going to be handled. Each community will handle it in different ways, but in any event, if you find yourself in a situation where you're being held vulnerable, that becomes a ransom issue. That becomes a harassment issue. It becomes a blackmail issue. And who knows up to what extent that goes to. That's why a lot of young sisters or young women in general, when they get caught up in the whole, in the whole expressing themselves physically and all that, it can go in a lot of different directions for them. And this whole movement now that we have out here in society where, the legitimization of this of sex work and all that type of stuff, it still doesn't protect the woman from the types of nonsense that we see as far as the abuse that they receive from men. And I'm speaking to Muslim and non-Muslim here. That's why I'm using this type of language. But I'll tell you that, if you're in that type of situation, you can't sit there. You got to realize you're in a legal issue now. You're in a legal issue. And that's why we say that it's not a male telling you what to do or a man telling you what to do, but you got to really think about the outcomes of when you open yourself up to a person in that way, right? And who knows, maybe in the future that may be a problem with men, but right now the problem is with women, how they're being blackmailed at that stuff. And to my Muslim sisters more directly, like I said, I don't want to get into the issues about whether it's permissible or not permissible from the start, because for some people they already are beyond that. I want to get into the issue of look at the outcomes and how you have to protect yourself, and look at what it leads to, and look at how in some communities it can cost you your life. Let's be real with that. When you start talking about honor killings and everything that takes place in that regard. So you have to really think about the consequences of that, and whether you want to give someone that level of weight over your neck, right? And we have to think about not normalizing that among young girls, young women, because even though there may be consent and in the system there may not be so much of an issue, what's done with that can become a legal issue, and it can be detrimental to a lot of parties, families in the future, children that come along and their mothers are held, they're captive to that nonsense, what was done in private and it became public. So it's a complicated issue. But if you're in that type of situation, that's the purpose of this video, because something was sent to me with regard to how would a person be advised in this regard. If you're in that situation, it becomes a legal matter, because you shouldn't hold yourself prisoner to the fact that you did an action, and now you're going to look at yourself in a negative way, and you're going to have someone hold that over your neck to the point where you can destroy yourself or destroy the people around you further, it becomes a legal intervention. In other words, if you say, for instance, if you're ashamed that you did that when you were younger or when you were in a relationship and now it's being used against you, forget about the shame issue. You got to deal with the situation as it is right now. The shame issue is between yourself and your creator. But you have to make sure that your safety is the priority. You have to make sure that you're not held captive to someone that is a devil and wants to blackmail you and abuse you and exploit you and do whatever because they're using the shame factor. And that's why I said you have to remove the shame factor. In Islam, you make tawbah, you repent, and you make an effort to, establish yourself, and that's it. In other moral systems, it's a different reality. Right? And that's why I said, that's why I'm talking in a general way, because I'm speaking in generalities, although this case has pertained to a specific type of situation. You have to use the legal means. You understand what I'm saying? Or else you'll be in a situation where this will persist on and on and on. And where it goes and where it stops, who knows? And what are the outcomes? Only God knows what the outcomes are, in that regard. So, sisters, I would advise, again, I know that there's a lot of ideas out there, but I would advise that you have discussions amongst yourselves about the possible negative outcomes of that type of activity. I know that it may be the case that a person, you may feel in love or whatever, and in that moment, that's where you're coming out of. But the outcomes, you got to think about the outcomes of that. Or you may be in a happy marriage, and it's something that a husband and wife are doing behind closed doors with an understanding that there's privacy. You got to think about the outcomes. What happens if it gets nasty? If there's a divorce, what happens if things change, and so on and so forth. So we leave it at that. Assalamu alaikum.